What's going on, my fellow A-plusers? It's your boy, Adam Perez. We're back once again with a brand new episode review as we're set to finally get into the season finale for The Lord of the Rings of Power Season 2. I'm almost a week late with this review. I'm dropping this on Tuesday evening for you guys. And to be fair, I really wanted to sit with this season finale for a couple days. Um, I didn't get the opportunity to watch the season finale the day that it wound up dropping. Me and the girlfriend actually wound up watching it this weekend, and I watched it for a second time yesterday. But I really wanted to sit with this, get everybody the opportunity to watch the season finale, and maybe a couple days later, kind of come back and see how we feel about it. And man, I got to tell you, I thought they knocked this one out of the park from top to bottom. This has been an absolutely incredible show, really doing its best to build off of what they gave us from season one and truly sort of taking it up a notch. I mean, the payoff of season one here with all the character building, setting up all the stories and stuff paid off beautifully, I thought, to bring us to this season finale here in season two. And I mean, from the opening sequence of here where we got King Durin facing off against the Balrog. I mean, visually stunning stuff, man. I talked about this in the previous episode where Muriel was meeting the sea creature Valor underwater, and one of the beautiful shots that they had of the sea creature and Muriel in the water at the same time, it felt like it was something ripped directly out of a concept art or the storyboard that they had for this season. And this was another shot. The King Durin coming at to attack the Balrog, I thought was just visually stunning. The incredible siege on Arasion, which I thought was handled beautifully in here, just from a technical standpoint. When we finally do get back to Arasion, I love just the really long shot sequence of seeing the orcs climbing over the wall. The camera pans and follows them to the front gate of Arasion where the orcs open it up. As the orcs rush through, the camera work still continuing to land on them, pulling back as everybody floods into Arasion. They even track one of the arrows that goes from the ground up to a higher wall, and then the camera literally continues to follow that soldier, not only as he goes down the pathway, but he jumps off the pathway down to the ground, gets killed, and then we somehow come across Galadriel saving a bunch of elves, all within one incredible technical shot. Now, they made it look like it was one long shot. I had a really tough time trying to track where the editing kind of came in. So who knows? Maybe it was either really well edited to look like one shot or it legit was a one shot. But regardless, I was really impressed with a lot of the technical aspects, the visual effects in here, and really just the incredible performances that really threw this episode over the top. I mean, the Sauron and Celebrimbor stuff was just as emotional as it gets. So roller coaster ride to certainly say the least. But thought they did a lot of great special effects and technical things in here, and a really great sort of wrap up of the story. And especially when it comes to season finales, right? Like, I feel like we can sometimes be critical about, where did you leave the characters off at? Did you push their story forward? Did you give us a sense of where they're going to be embarking on next? And I thought season two's finale did a little bit of everything, right? We had some closed endings for some characters, some deaths, but clearly beginnings of new adventures and new paths that we're going to be setting up on. So, like when we get Poppy's sort of epilogue, if you will, or her little speech, her monologue that she gives at the end, I really love the editing moments of following along all these storylines, seeing where they're ending, and kind of giving us a little bit of a hope for a future. Even Galadriel at the end of here talks about, with all the death and the darkness that we've kind of seen in season two, the fact that she wants to overcome all of that by utilizing the light, right? Being the light to kind of shine through the darkness, not only to give them hope, but their people and the elven world and Middle Earth sort of hope. So I really enjoyed the trajectory in which we wind up getting season two ended here. Clearly, having Sauron have a huge victory under his belt, amassing an army of orcs now, and how do the elves respond? And I thought this was just a really heartbreaking season finale to say the least, but one with some epic storylines and character moments, and one that I'm definitely going to remember and look very, very forward to season three to certainly say the least. But guys, let's get into it in detail. But look, also before we do, I need to know your thoughts. What were some of your overall thoughts on this particular week's episode, and even some of your thoughts on this particular season as a whole? These are just simply my A plus opinions, but I certainly want to know yours. So let your thoughts be known in the comment section box below, guys. But let me just talk about the kicking off of this episode real quick. As in my notes, I put the Balrog awakens as we see Prince Durin confront his father, who, despite his son's pleas, has opened up another area of the mountain that he was warned not to. Now, we saw Durin's wife say, "Hey, there's an old there's an old ancient evil down there. Don't open it up." But what do people do? They open it up. King Durin, being under the influence of his ring, clearly feels that he knows the mountain better than anybody else. I love I love the fact that Prince Durin in here reminds his father that he said, "Remember, Dad, you said these mountains are not ours, right? They don't belong to us." And that's probably a good mindset to certainly have kept. But clearly, with the corruption of the ring, he now believes, like, with this ring we can own the mountain, but that is never the case. And while I will say nature will always succeed, I don't know if the Balrog is nature, but I definitely do think the Balrog will most likely always succeed in this circumstance. And so, really heartbreaking stuff to see a son pleading with his father to the point of, like, look, I love the fact that his father even challenged him, and Durin goes back to an old memory of his when he was a kid, and how he sort of admired and looked upon his father as sort of like this strong man, and understanding, like, this is not a confrontation Prince Durin wants to have. He just wants his father back. And the fact that his father isn't listening is really pushing Prince Durin to a place where he's almost ready to go ahead and take his dad's arm off, if he can muster up the strength. And so I really enjoyed that moment between them, and I even enjoyed the moment too when just when you think things are okay, and he opens up and he shows you the veins of Mithril under this mountain. The Balrog certainly emerging, using that fire whip of his that he's so famous for. It worked when it came to Gandalf. It seemed like it worked when it came to King Durin. But this is the moment when King Durin actually takes the ring off, presents it back to his son, and really just kind of says a farewell in here. And I visually, I thought it was just absolutely stunning of seeing him turn around, leap off the cliff, and take on the Balrog head on. And so, impressive stuff, man. Impressive stuff. If anything, I do wish that we had gotten to see a little bit more of that story, but you want to talk about sort of setting the tone and setting the pace of what the rest of the episode is going to be like. I mean, we get the huge Balrog collision and clash just as the opening title sequence begins. I mean, that's literally how this episode kicks off, and I knew it was going to be incredible from that moment on. I mean, if anything, I do wish we had more of Prince Durin, because outside of that, the rest of the episode, we do get the dwarves finally arriving without Prince Durin, as Prince Durin is certainly grieving the loss of his father. And I do love this setup that he puts our dwarves in the sense that Prince Durin, he has not put on the ring. He clearly wants to be reluctant at it. His wife has been pleading him not to, but now that the king is passed, there's a big vacancy to the throne. Now Prince Durin is about to be challenged for the throne, if you will, and now he's got all these other greedy dwarves that have been paying into his father's grifting scheme, if you will, and now they probably are owed rings. And so now Durin, seeing what the ring has done to his father, now has to make some really tough decisions. Do I wear the ring? Do I send these rings off to corrupt other people? What is he going to do? That I certainly don't know. But I love the moment in here with the Durins. I just wish that we wind up getting a little bit more. But a great way to go ahead and set up this whole entire episode. And look, let's talk about the siege of Eregion as we move over to sort of the Sauron, Celebrimbor, and Galadriel sort of stuff. First off, epic sequence to thrust us sort of back into the battle. I talked about that a little bit at the opening in the sense of, like, just from a technical filmmaking standpoint. But, Charles Edwards, who plays Celebrimbor, turned into being target practice for poor Sauron in here. I was kind of curious as to where they left Celebrimbor at after we saw Sauron sort of take out his bodyguards, and he seems like he's been kind of torturing Celebrimbor ever since then in order to kind of get whereabouts as to where the rings are at. Charles Edwards and Charlie Vickers deserve some level of like Emmy nominations for their performance in here. I mean, I usually say actors carried a season if the season itself was kind of mid, and they were the best parts of it. And while I've really enjoyed season 2, these two were for me some the most incredible moments that we've had all season in here. And I thought they did a brilliant job in showcasing the peak of that emotional journey where we get to see just really two sides of Celebrimbor along with Sauron in here that were as emotional as it certainly gets, right? I love Celebrimbor's pushback to Sauron in the sense of gloating and taunting him about the idea that Celebrimbor at this point really has nothing to lose. And the fact that he taunts Sauron in the sense of like, where I'm gonna go, you can't follow, right? I think he mentioned something like how he will go to the shores of the morning and taunt Sauron that he will never be able to experience that. Sort of in a sense of like, I'm going to be going to sort of my heaven, if you will, to enjoy the things that my God or ancestors have kind of set out before me, sort of thing. And because of the fact that you are as dark as it comes, right? Like you are just as sinful as it gets, as hate-filled as it gets, you will never be able to experience the happiness and the joy and the release that I'm about to experience in this afterlife. So like, do whatever that you want to for me. At the end of the day, I'm going to be the victor and you're still going to be the loser. And I love the fact that he really makes sort of this final statement of explaining to Sauron that you are truly a prisoner of your own creation, right? The idea that he even says something along the lines of like, the treachery that you have sort of brought amongst all of us, sort of thing, is truly within those rings. Like the treachery that you suppose is the same treachery that those rings are going to cause to you and certainly be your downfall. And the fact that Celebrimbor has that vision of like one of those rings being that downfall, calling in him not only a prisoner to the rings, but also the Lord of the Rings. I mean, just some impactful moment here for Celebrimbor in regards to really setting up Sauron to kind of go down this path. Like there's a moment in here towards the end when Poppy is saying her eulogy, not her eulogy, the epilogue or her final sort of monologue, if you will, where she talks about the idea of like, where do you go from here, creating something new. And there's a great shot of Sauron holding on to the smith's hammer. And in that moment, I started thinking to myself, like, this is probably the moment where Sauron is in deep contemplation in regards to what Celebrimbor said to him, that he's infused treachery sort of into these rings, and that he is now a prisoner to them, that they will then cause treachery upon himself. And this is where I think he starts realizing, I need one ring to rule over all of them. Like I will be damned if anything gets the opportunity to rule me and deceive me. And so I do believe that this is probably the moment where he thinks to himself, even though he's got the 9 rings now, I need to go ahead and make that one ring. And so I think this is the moment where we see that. But emotional scene, man. I mean, brutal scene where he literally shanks him with the big spear, lifts him up and just leaves him there, the dangle. I love just the performance of Charlie Vickers, of the one tear stream kind of coming down, and then just his emotional battle and back and forth, where we get to see Sauron facing off against Galadriel, which I thought was a great battle. Fantastic choreography, if you will. And I love how they also sort of tapped into his deceiving role as he transforms through multiple people in this battle. Just when she believes she's got the upper hand, I love that he turns back to Halbrand, right? Like this is as soft of a spot for Galadriel as it certainly comes. And if anything, I really enjoyed Galadriel's story arc over the past 2 seasons. Seeing just the connection that she had with Brand, seeing the fact that she too was deceived at the end of season 1, and her coming to the realization by the end of season 2. And I talked about this at the very beginning. Like, she thinks that all decisions that she's making are her own. But what she doesn't understand is that these decisions that she believes she's making is the one that Sauron is veering her to and corrupting her to and deceiving her to. And the fact that she comes to this realization, like, wow, this was your plan all along. Like, yeah, girl. You're the only one besides me and Elrond. You were the only one that did not know what was going on around you. And I love the fact that he's been so influenced into her mind, that he still uses that against her by turning to Halbrand and her just for that moment of weakness and to stop her, because she probably could have killed him in that moment. But utilizing that soft spot that she had. And one of the things that I have been talking about here is like the way that they have handled this relationship between Sauron and Galadriel. Look, I don't know if in Tolkien's work there has been any sort of romantic connection here. But I kind of like the insinuation that there certainly is one. I mean, those were definitely some of the vibes that I was getting from season 1 with her connection with Halbrand, just some of the long glances at each other, the long stares. There seems to be like some sort of emotional bond. I mean, even when we were talking about Galadriel earlier this season being confronted by Adar or being confronted by Elrond about how Sauron is manipulating her, anytime that they talked about him still being a part of her, the expressions that Galadriel gives is almost felt like it was like a fluttering of the heart, right? Or like an exasperation, or like I don't want to say a romantic sigh, but just like something overwhelming kind of comes over her in the sense of like, not that he's just a part of her, but that there's something a little bit more deeper. Like, I don't want to say on a romantic scale because we didn't really see them like even kiss or anything, but the closeness and the bond and like what they both sort of were fighting for. There might have been a glimpse of hope that there was certainly more there for Galadriel, and then the fact that she wind up getting deceived and stuff, but still having that connection, as powerful as it is. I think it's a great tool in order for Sauron to manipulate and get around Galadriel in here. And that's one of the reasons why I never understood people, if there were people that said, oh, Galadriel's such a Mary Sue. I personally never saw it because I clearly see the faults that Galadriel has had. And 2 seasons in a row, Sauron has literally gotten what he's wanted because of Galadriel and his deception of Galadriel. And so I thought it was really great to kind of see these two face to face once again. Seeing Sauron even claim that he would have made her queen and have everybody sort of bow before her. So there's definitely a bond between these two. Again, I don't know if it'll ever get to the point of sexual or super over romanticized, but I think they did just enough in here to tease that I find acceptable, and ready to see how they handle that sort of bond between them, certainly going forward. So great stuff in here. Great way to go ahead and kick off this episode with Khazad-dûm and the Eregion battle along with Sauron and Galadriel. Really did it for me in here. I will say shout out to Adar's storyline in here, because I did not see the Adar situation kind of coming full circle. It's a very much a poetic justice, if you will, for Sauron in here to get the upper hand on Adar and literally kill him off, and very much what was an echo from episode 1 in how Adar sort of turned his back on him, right? Deceiving him, killing Sauron with not only the crown and shanking him, but then having the other orcs come up and literally stab him to death. I mean, the same way, the same death. I mean, again, poetic justice here, man, and this for Sauron at least, in the sense of getting his revenge on Adar. I think if there was sort of like a heartbreaking moment for me when I watched that, it had a lot to do with the fact that it was Adar's own son, or at least I'm under the impression that it was his son. Even though he calls these people children, for this particular orc, it almost felt like he was his son and he was his father, and they had like a whole family dynamic kind of going on. I don't know if it was certainly that close or not, but the fact that Adar looked at these orcs as his children, only for them to then be corrupted by Sauron and be the one to kind of stab him in his back and be the downfall of him. Truly tragic stuff, man. And we were getting to the point too where Adar was willing to give up everything in order to put his belief and his pride behind that of Galadriel and the elves, talking about the idea like, hey, if you help me take down Sauron, me and my people will go back to Mordor and we'll leave you guys alone in peace sort of mentality. And so I just thought really cool visual makeup work too, to kind of be able to see Adar as his natural self. But I will say, just from a writing dialogue, like storyline perspective, one of the things that didn't make sense to me is when he says, when we see Adar trying to create a truce here with Galadriel, he's like, here, I'm gonna give you back your ring if you help me kill Sauron. I will leave your people alone. I don't know if the response to that from Galadriel was the best, where she just wants to remind him as to how terrible she's been. She says, I have slain more of your children than any elf alive. Like, why would you tell him that? Like, the man is literally trying to make a truce, and you want to tell him how many children of his he's killed off. Like, are you trying to ruin this truce? Like, you trying to just sabotage this before it even begins? So, really questionable dialogue in that particular moment. But great moment, I thought, overall. And that, look, Adar is one of the characters that I've come to enjoy over this season, so to kind of see his downfall really surprised me in here. But I love the way that they executed it, because it had to feel good for Sauron to certainly say the least. Look, I'll be honest though, if there is a storyline I did not necessarily care for this season, it probably is the Gandalf one, or as we come to find out in this episode, the stranger technically equals Gandalf. I think for me, the weakness has been in just sort of like the execution of it. Very much like they didn't have too much material for the stores or the Harfoots or the stranger in general, besides the Tom Bombadil stuff. And so it felt very sort of scattered all throughout this season. And so when we get the payoff at the end, it doesn't really do much for me. They don't really do much with the Dark Wizard all season, so you don't really know who the hell this guy is in the first place. I am led to believe that this is Saruman, the Dark Wizard of Rune. But I don't know, maybe he'll go on to eventually describe himself as something more. But the sequence of catching up with Gandalf in here, realizing he clearly didn't go to try and find his staff. He went to go find his friend, which was against the wishes of Tom Bombadil, or at least Tom Bombadil hinted at the idea that this may not be a good idea. So we just catch up to him at the stores, like he knew exactly where to go. And then secondly, we get the confrontation with the Dark Wizard that clearly is a manipulation play here, because he's clearly the one that hired the people to kidnap the Harfoots. And then when it goes wrong, he wants to pretend that he's a good guy, but then reveals he's a bad guy. It just felt kind of out of place, really messy, and a storyline that I don't necessarily cared for. I think out of the Gandalf and Harfoot storyline, the moments that I cared about, him meeting Tom Bombadil, which is kind of cool in the sense of really seeing Gandalf pick up on his quirks, some of his phrases, where he gets maybe some of his mannerisms and his personality from. You can definitely tell. I mean, him singing songs, drinking by the campfire, that we've known Gandalf to certainly do from like the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Like I can see where Gandalf learned a lot of that stuff or picked up that stuff from. So I thought the addition of Tom Bombadil this season worked for me, and I appreciated seeing sort of the history of the stores and how that winds up sort of creating the Harfoots, who will then eventually find their sanctuary. And if anything, I would assume that Nori in here, as the stores are now kind of pushed from their homes, I would assume that the stores would then become more nomadic and maybe have somebody like Nori help lead them. Even though Nori and Gandalf have sort of gone down their separate paths now and are clearly splitting ways, I kind of hope, even though we do have a lot of sort of storylines that they're already trying to juggle, there is a part of me that would like to see Nori return in season 3, or maybe they take a break from the Harfoot and Stores story and maybe wait an additional season before kind of bringing them back to give them some time to roam and maybe eventually discover the Shire. I don't know, but I find myself still invested in these characters. I just thought the way that they handled it this season, it felt like they put other storylines sort of at the forefront, and this was sort of their semi, I don't want to say forgotten, because it did set up a couple of pieces of interesting things, but I thought overall it didn't necessarily flesh itself out execution wise the way that I personally would have liked to have seen it. So that was probably the weaker of the storylines that we wind up getting. But we do have Gandalf officially here with his name. And then last but not least, the Numenor stuff. We'll talk a little bit about Elendil along with Isildur in here. But I just got to say, you're trying to tell me that after the Queen made a complete fool of everybody, right? Tested the ocean. The sea doesn't lie, y'all. The sea creature tossed her back on the shore and was like, this ain't it. She's qualified. After everybody seeing that, leave it up to this quasi king of Numenor to then come up with some bullshit explanation of, oh, it's all Sauron's doing, and is now going full-fledged on sort of capturing enemies of the state, as he's certainly referring to them. And so while the people are clearly still behind Queen Muriel, this new king certainly does not want that whatsoever. I would assume that the king looked into the Palantir and saw some sort of vision, and now this is what he's coming up with. And so at this point, I'm over the Numenoreans, to be quite honest with you. I'm over Elendil's daughter, too, who's just a smug bitch, man. Like, I cannot, me and the girlfriend cannot stand this woman. The Elendil's daughter and then the king's son that we see going over to Middle Earth and, discovering a returning Isildur and now sort of bringing him back to Numenor. Those two characters, the Elendil's daughter and the king's son, I cannot stand either of them. They're both assholes, if you ask me personally. But we do see Elendil at least getting a heads up, so he gets the opportunity to kind of escape. This is where, for me, I'm really glad that we finally get the opportunity to see the sword in Narsil. Yeah, Narsil is the name of the sword. Muriel winds up giving Elendil the sword to go ahead and find his lordship once again, get his title back, if you will, and really find out what his destiny is. And this is very much lining up with what Elendil wind up seeing in the Palantir. And so this is really the beginning story for Narsil, as this will eventually get passed down to Isildur, who will then use that same sword to chop off the finger or chop the ring off of Sauron's hand, and then which we will see eventually Aragorn himself wield at some point in time also. So really great connection and lineage in here. If anything tripped me out, I am tripped out now by the sense of Elendil leaving Numenor. He's clearly headed west. He said he's going to be taking a ferry somewhere else, but as he's going out, Isildur is now coming in. So I do wonder, will they meet each other in passing? Will they overlap? Will Isildur show up to Numenor and everything's like hit in the fan sort of thing and they're still separated? I am personally waiting for the reunion of these two characters. Like, truly, I want to see father and son connect again based off of Elendil really still believing that his son is dead, and I think he deserves at least some sort of level of hope at some point in time. I hope it doesn't come in a moment of like Elendil dying and then Isildur finding him just in time to say farewell to his father. I really would love a tremendous reunion between, and an impactful reunion between these two, because when I think of Aragorn using Narsil, I think of a sword that's so pure and being held by somebody that deserves it. And when I think of people that deserve it holding Narsil, I think of Elendil. I love his loyalty. I love his devotion and his determination. And if that is where like a kingdom begins, or like the lineage of a very powerful sword in the sense of Narsil and Aragorn's, lineage and stuff, I can truly get on board with it because of how much I'm a big fan of Elendil, certainly as a character in here. So Look, guys, I'm sure there are probably moments in this episode that I certainly missed out on, some really great things for us to sink our teeth into, but we can definitely do that in the comment section box below. I definitely want to go ahead and continue these conversations with you guys. Even though we don't have any more Rings of Power reviews, any news that winds up dropping for season 3 will keep you guys covered on, and any casting announcements and any changes that might happen to the season. I don't believe it's been renewed yet for a 3rd season, but I fully expect it to. I have been hearing reports that they're pretty close to renewing it, and after the success of season 2, I got to imagine that we are full steam ahead for not only seasons 3 but 4 and 5 as well. And so if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the channel, man. I think you'll certainly enjoy it. I know this was a longer than normal review, but usually when it comes to the season finales, I like to make sure that we cover all of our bases and our characters and really see where we're at. And when it comes to where we're at, you know, the king of the elves, Galadriel, Elrond. Oh, we also saw Elrond wear the ring too, and him being more than capable of taking it off and giving it back to Galadriel. But we also saw Arendir, a part of that crew also. The wood elf is certainly joining them too. So formidable foursome, if you ask me, that clearly have hope in regards to trying to figure out what the next move is going to be for the elves. Do they go on the attack? Do they go on the defense? Who knows? But despite their losses in here and the loss of Erasion, they seem ready to go ahead and take the fight to Sauron. So I'm really looking forward to it. So look, guys, look, again, you know, I'm sure that there are some pure Tolkien Knights out there that may not necessarily be super pleased with the direction in which the Rings of Power have gone. You know, if you're a purist and you have a really hard time with understanding the idea of the liberties and the freedom that some of these creators have to have in regards to adapting such heavy work by Tolkien into a television series. You know, I feel like anytime that there's an adaptation of the book, you're always going to have some level of purists that will never sort of be satisfied. And while Amazon, if I'm not mistaken, I believe they have the rights to the appendices and the Silmarillion, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm pronouncing that right. You know, some of these moments that are happening in the Rings of Power, hundreds, if not thousands of years sort of separated in time. And so to be able to tell sort of like a fluid story and concept of a story, you know, having to move around certain pieces. When did this happen and when did this happen, in order to make it a drama filled and connect the tissues so that you can, because I have a feeling like if we wanted a true adaptation of Tolkien's work, we would be here for like 20 seasons. Okay, so there is an element of freedom and liberties that I think us as viewers have to be okay with, in the sense of being able to tell a coherent story by also hitting big fantastical moments within that time period, but also making it flow over a time and a course of 8 episodes for 5 seasons. That's a lot of heavy lifting, and for me, I do not envy the creators and the showrunners that have to take these morsels of information and somehow shape and bind them into an epic sort of story that we wind up getting here in season 2. So, you know, to each their own. Again, while I am more of a general audience viewer, I have just watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy from Peter Jackson. I have personally read the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Tolkien, and that's really all the work that I've seen outside of the Hobbit movies. But from a literature standpoint, I've only read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I'm loving what we're having right now. And so, you know, if anything, this does make me want to pick up the appendices. If anything, this does make me want to pick up the Silmarillion. And so I think for some people that feel some type of way about the Rings of Power, instead of hating on it, instead of trashing it, you know, there's nothing wrong with having your own opinions of what you felt could certainly be done better. But I do think, understand that your voice does carry weight. Your voice can stop people from being interested in Tolkien work. Your point of views can push people away from wanting to even embrace that world. So I do think that we all need to take a different perspective and a different way of how we approach and how we critique and how we talk about some of this content, if we truly find ourselves ourselves fans or call ourselves fans of these franchises and fandoms. You don't necessarily got to like it, but at least do your part in helping other people find the content, or helping people have an entryway into learning more about Tolkien's work. Because if anything, I think the Rings of Power, while it may not be accurate to the appendices or the Silmarillion, like myself, I bet it probably interests a lot of people to then finding more of Tolkien's work. So don't push people away from the franchise just because of the fact that you're not happy with an adaptation, because some people will, and it will bring them to Tolkien's work. But other than that, guys, I thought this was a fabulous season. Again, Rings of Power can't be successful without the good season 1 that we wind up having and the great season 2 that certainly followed it. But look, these are just simply my A+ opinions at the end of the day. I want to know yours. Let your thoughts be known in the comment section box below, guys, and we'll definitely continue to have this conversation. But until next time, do me a big favor, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep it A+. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.